Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into the science of mantras and exploring a really fascinating question. What if some sounds carry a power that our ears just can't detect? We're about to break down an article that lays out a whole framework for that exact idea. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. We're going to start with something we all get, the power of everyday words. Then, we'll journey into this core concept called shabda, or sublime sound. From there, we'll get into the actual practice used to tap into it, what it supposedly does, and how the article calls for a new way to study this ancient idea with modern science. Okay, let's just start with the big question that this whole thing is built around. The source material wants us to really think about this. Is it possible that sound has a whole other layer to it, something beyond what our ears can actually pick up? Keep that question in mind because it's the key to everything else we're about to discuss. All right, let's dive right in. Now, before we get into the really cosmic, far-out stuff, the article grounds us in something we all experience every single day, the real, undeniable power of the words we speak. The source makes this incredibly simple but powerful point. Our words, they're not just empty sounds carrying data. They actually create what the article calls a field of influence that's shaped by our intentions. And this is true, right? A kind word can totally make your day, while a cruel one can stick with you for hours. The article says this isn't just psychology, it's a real, tangible effect. Okay, so stick with me here, because this is where the article takes that idea of powerful words and just blows it wide open. It introduces this core concept it calls sublime sound. So the article basically says sound works on two different levels. Over on the left, you've got the sound we all know, the physical acoustic waves that our ears pick up. But then on the right, it describes something totally different, a sublime sound. This isn't noise. It's described as a current of consciousness, an energy that you don't hear with your ears, but that you experience with your mind. And this special sublime energy, it has a name, shabda. The article defines it as this potent consciousness energy that's packed inside the specific sounds and syllables of Vedic mantras. So the key takeaway is that we're not talking about the sound wave itself, but about the fundamental energy it's said to carry. Now here's a twist, and this might sound a little counterintuitive. The source claims that the literal meaning of the words in the mantra, well, it barely matters at all. The real power, it argues, doesn't come from understanding a translation. It comes from the unique rhythmic vibrations that the sounds themselves create.
So the logical next question is, if this consciousness energy called Shabda is real, how in the world do you access it? Well, that brings us to the actual practice the article describes, Japa Yoga.
Japa Yoga is basically presented as the instruction manual, the technique for unlocking and, as the article puts it, extracting the shabda from a mantra. And the key to the whole thing? Rhythmic repetition. That's what's said to generate the specific vibrations you need to get the desired effect. And the article outlines this really interesting progression through 3 levels of the practice. You start with Vachaka Japa, which is chanting out loud. Then you move to Upanshu Japa, which is quieter, more like a murmur or a hum. And finally, you get to Manasa Japa, which is completely silent, just a mental repetition. So you see the pattern, right? The external sound gets quieter and quieter because the focus is shifting deeper and deeper inward. I love this analogy the article uses to make it all click. It says to think of Japa like an old school typewriter. Each mantra is like a specific key. Repeating that mantra over and over is like striking that key again and again, which produces a very specific, predictable letter or effect on the paper, which in this case is our body and mind. Okay, so what are these effects we keep talking about? What's the supposed payoff? Let's get into the impact this practice is claimed to have, which the article says begins with you, the individual, and then expands way, way out. The first effect is supposedly internal. According to the article, the vibrations from the mantra directly stimulate the body's chakras, which are described as these subtle energy centers. Now, this is important because these chakras are said to be linked to our endocrine glands, and those glands, as you know, regulate our hormones, which can affect everything from our stress levels to our overall sense of well-being. This brings us to a really crucial comparison the article makes. It suggests that these sublime sonic waves from mantras are just fundamentally different and way more powerful than our regular, everyday thought waves. It claims that these mantra waves can actually create a peaceful atmosphere and are strong enough to override negative thought patterns. And this is where it goes from personal to cosmic. The article argues that these powerful sonic waves don't just stay with you. They're said to radiate outward into the cosmos, influencing something it calls the ideosphere. Think of it like a collective mental atmosphere. The idea is that this could create a positive influence on a massive scale. Okay, so I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds pretty out there, right? So how does the article even begin to explain these huge claims? Well, it doesn't just stick to ancient ideas. It actually tries to build a bridge to the modern world using analogies from science. Now, to make these concepts a little easier to grasp, the article points to principles from physics, and it's really important to get this. These are analogies, not literal scientific explanations. For instance, it brings up the idea of wave superimposition, where two waves can combine to form one much stronger wave, to suggest how repeating a mantra might amplify its energetic effect. And that brings us to the final part, and it tackles the big question that I'm sure is on your mind. Where's the hard scientific proof for any of this? You have to give the article credit here. It's totally upfront about the main challenge. It states that the core phenomenon it's describing, these sublime waves of Shabda, are simply beyond the reach of our current scientific instruments. Our tools are built to measure the physical world, and this is supposedly non-physical. So where do we go from here? Well, the article doesn't just throw its hands up. Instead, it calls for a really fundamental shift in how we do research. It suggests that to even begin to study this, science might need to adopt the perspective of the ancient sages, the rishis, and start its investigation with consciousness itself rather than with matter. And that really brings us full circle, leaving us with the article's central, most provocative question. It challenges the very limits of our current scientific worldview by asking us to consider, what if some of the most powerful forces in the universe can't be put under a microscope? What if they can only be experienced? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me.